Earthquake Hero, a German shepherd's race to save a buried child. The sun hung high in the cloudless sky, casting a golden glow over the small town. It was a lively afternoon. The streets buzzed with the usual sounds of daily life. Children laughed as they played near the apartment complexes, their voices blending with the hum of passing cars and distant chatter of shopkeepers selling their goods. In a small courtyard outside an apartment building, a young boy, Daniel, 5 to 7 years, old Hugh giggled as he tossed a tennis ball. His loyal German shepherd, Max, stood a few feet away, ears perked, muscles tense, waiting for the throw. As soon as Daniel's tiny hands released the ball, Max sprang forward like a blur, catching it mid-air before trotting back with a proud wag of his tail. "You're so fast, Max," Daniel cheered, hugging his furry friend. The dog's deep brown eyes gleamed with devotion as he nuzzled the boy's cheek. To Max, Daniel was everything. His best friend, his responsibility, his world. Daniel and Max had been inseparable since the boy was a toddler. The bond they shared was unbreakable. Every morning Max would wake Daniel up with a gentle nudge, and every evening they would play together in the courtyard. When Daniel was sick, Max would curl up beside him, refusing to leave his side. Today was no different. The boy's laughter echoed as he hugged Max tightly. The dog's tail thumped against the ground in happiness. No matter what, Max was always there for him. "I wish we could play all day," Daniel said, scratching Max's ears. The German shepherd let out a soft whine as if agreeing. Suddenly, Max stiffened. His ears twitched and his body tensed. As he sniffed the air, something was wrong. In the distance, birds took flight in a sudden, frantic rush, their wings flapping against the wind. A group of stray dogs howled in unison, an eerie sound that sent chills down Daniel's spine. "Max," Daniel frowned. "What's wrong?" The German shepherd let out a low, uneasy growl and started pacing. His instincts screamed that something terrible was about to happen. He nudged Daniel's leg with urgency, trying to get his attention, but the boy didn't understand. To him, everything seemed normal. Then it happened. A deep guttural rumble came from beneath the earth. The ground beneath them shuddered violently, sending ripples through the streets. Windows rattled and parked cars bounced slightly. People stopped in their tracks, looking around in confusion. Daniel gasped, gripping Max's fur for balance. "Max!" The dog barked loudly and grabbed Daniel's sleeve with his teeth, tugging him toward the open street, away from the towering buildings. He knew what was coming. He had sensed it before the first tremor, but they were already out of time. A deafening roar split through the air as the earthquake struck with full force. The pavement cracked, and the buildings swayed dangerously. Terrified screams filled the streets as people ran for cover. Daniel stumbled backward, his tiny feet unable to keep up with the shifting ground. The apartment complex behind him groaned, the massive structure beginning to collapse floor by floor. "Daniel!" a voice screamed, his mother's voice. Before Daniel could turn, the building gave way, and in the blink of an eye, a mountain of debris crashed down upon him. Dust and rubble exploded outward, creating a thick, suffocating cloud. Then, silence. Max froze in horror, watching his best friend disappear beneath the wreckage. For a moment, the world around him blurred. His body trembled, his mind refused to accept what had happened. But then his instincts kicked in. A desperate, heart-wrenching bark tore from his throat. He lunged forward, trying to dig through the debris, his powerful paws scraping against broken concrete and twisted metal. The dust burned his eyes and filled his lungs, but he didn't care. His boy was under there, somewhere, and Max wasn't leaving without him. Around him, the town was in chaos. People sobbed, calling out for loved ones. Rescue workers rushed to collapsed buildings, searching for survivors. Sirens blared in the distance. But Max wasn't listening to any of it. His focus was only on Daniel. A pair of hands grabbed him, one of the rescue workers trying to pull him away. "Hey dog, it's not safe here!" But Max growled fiercely and pulled away. He refused to leave. The rescue worker sighed. "Stubborn dog." Max sniffed the air, searching for Daniel's scent beneath the dust, the destruction, the overwhelming scent of crushed concrete. He could still smell him, weak, faint, But he was alive, and Max was going to find him. This was it. Max had always been Daniel's protector, his guardian, but today he was his only hope. Ignoring his own injuries and exhaustion, Max started digging again, his powerful claws scraping against the debris. A few feet away, the rescue worker who had tried to stop him watched in awe. That dog. He's not giving up, he muttered. Another rescuer, covered in dust, nodded. Maybe we should follow him. Max dug harder, faster, whimpering between each breath. He had to get to Daniel, because Daniel wasn't just his owner. He was his family, and Max wasn't leaving without him. Thick clouds of dust still hung in the air, mixing with the acrid scent of broken concrete and twisted metal. The street, once alive with laughter, was now filled with the cries of the wounded and the desperate calls of rescuers searching for survivors. Amid the chaos, Max stood firm, his paws planted on the crumbling rubble where Daniel had disappeared. His fur was coated in dust, his body bruised from the falling debris, but he refused to move. His sharp eyes scanned the destruction, his ears twitching at every sound. Rescue teams had begun assessing the damage. A firefighter, his uniform streaked, with ash, shook his head grimly. This building took a direct hit. The chances of finding survivors are low. A medic nearby sighed, adjusting his helmet. If anyone was in there when it fell, they're probably gone. Max's ears flattened against his head. The words stung, but he didn't believe them. He could still smell Daniel, faint, buried deep under the dust and concrete, but it was there. His boy was alive, and Max wasn't going to let them give up. A heart-wrenching wail pierced the air. Daniel's mother, her hands trembling, fell to her knees. "No, no, my baby," she sobbed. Her husband held her close, his own face pale with shock. "They can't find him," he whispered. "He's gone." The rescuers turned away, moving to check other collapsed buildings. There were many people in need, too many bodies to recover. But Max refused to leave. The German Shepherd sniffed the rubble, his heart pounding. His body ached, exhaustion clawing at him, but he dug his paws into the debris and began to scratch furiously. One of the rescue workers noticed. "Hey, that dog!" Max barked sharply, his tail stiff, his entire body radiating urgency. He turned to the humans, his dark eyes pleading. Daniel was still down there, and Max needed them to listen. The ground trembled again, an aftershock. Cracks splintered through the weakened buildings, sending bricks tumbling. A loud crack echoed through the street as a nearby structure collapsed, sending another cloud of dust into the air. "Get back! It's not safe!" a firefighter shouted, pulling a survivor away. Max stumbled but stayed put. He let out a low whine, shaking the dust from his fur. His paws throbbed from digging, tiny cuts forming where sharp debris had sliced into them. Blood stained the rubble beneath him, but he didn't care. The rescuers hesitated. They had seen search and rescue dogs in action before, but Max wasn't trained. He was just a pet. "Should we pull him away?" one of them asked. The lead rescuer hesitated. He watched Max dig, saw the desperation in the dog's body language. "He's looking for someone," the man muttered. "We need to follow him." Underneath, the mountain of destruction, in the suffocating darkness, Daniel was still alive. The boy lay curled in a small pocket of air, his tiny fingers clutching a piece of his torn shirt. His head ached, his lungs burned from the dust, and his body felt heavy, too heavy to move. He wanted to cry, but his voice was too weak. Above him he could hear Max barking. Daniel's lips trembled. "Max!" But the dog couldn't hear him. The rubble was too thick, the weight of the destruction too great. Still, the faint sound of his best friend gave Daniel something to hold on to. He wasn't alone. Max was still looking for him. Back on the surface, Max's barks grew frantic. He sniffed again, pinpointing the exact spot. He pawed at the dirt, throwing dust into the air, his body moving with fierce determination. Some of the rescue workers exchanged uneasy glances. "There's nothing there," one of them muttered. Max growled lowly. They were wasting time. An older firefighter stepped forward. He crouched beside Max, watching the dog's movements carefully. Max wasn't just digging randomly, he was focused. He was sure. "Start digging here," the firefighter commanded. "If that dog says someone's down there, I believe him." The younger rescuers hesitated, but when the older man started clearing debris, they joined in. Minutes passed, then half an hour. They dug carefully, clearing piece after piece of the fallen building. Every second mattered. If Daniel was still alive, he didn't have much air left. But some rescuers started to doubt. "We've been digging for too long. Maybe the dog is just confused." Max snapped his head up, baring his teeth. He let out a deep guttural bark, not of fear but of defiance. He turned back to the rubble, sniffed the air, and let out a long, agonized howl. A silent message to the humans. "Don't stop. He's there. Keep going." One of the rescuers wiped sweat from his brow. All right, let's dig faster." They dug deeper, removing heavier chunks of concrete and twisted metal. Then, wait. A hush fell over the group. A soft noise, a faint whimper. Then, a small, weak cough. "He's alive!" one of the rescuers shouted. Max's ears shot forward, his tail wagged furiously, his whole body trembling. Daniel was there. Right. There. With renewed energy, the team worked quickly. Hands moved faster, shovels scraped against stone, dust clouded the air. And then, finally, a small, trembling hand emerged from the rubble. Gasps filled the air. Someone reached in, grasping the child's arm carefully. "We've got him." Daniel was pulled from the debris, his face pale, his tiny chest rising and falling weakly. He coughed, eyes fluttering open, and the first thing he saw was Max. Thua. German Shepard let out a whimper of relief, rushing forward. He licked Daniel's face, nuzzling him, whining softly as if to say, "I told you I'd find you." Daniel's cracked lips parted into a weak, sleepy smile. "Max, you saved." "Thank you." The crowd erupted into cheers. Tears streamed down Daniel's mother's face as she embraced her son. The rescuers looked at Max with newfound respect. "That dog. He's a hero," one of them murmured. Max didn't care about the praise. All that mattered was that his boy was safe. The air was thick with dust, the acrid scent of broken concrete stinging every breath. The rescue team hesitated, their exhausted bodies aching from hours of digging. Some believed they had done all they could, that there was no hope left. But Max, limping, covered in grime and breathing heavily, wasn't giving up. He barked furiously, his paws scraping against the same spot over and over. His eyes, usually filled with warmth, now burned with desperation. "We have to keep digging here," one rescuer insisted, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Are we sure?" another asked, glancing at the unstable debris around them. "If we're wrong, we could waste precious time." Max let out a low whimper, then growled, his body tensed as if pleading with them to listen. The lead rescuer made a decision. Trust the dog, start digging. With renewed urgency, the team moved as fast as they could, their tools clashing against the wreckage. Then it happened. A sound. Faint, weak, barely there. Everyone froze. Their breaths caught in their throats. Had they imagined it? Or had it been real? Max whined, ears perked, his tail rigid with anticipation. Then the voice came again, fragile, broken. "Max." The boy's name barely left his lips, but it was enough. Gasps filled the air. The rescuers exchanged stunned looks. "He's alive!" one of them shouted. Max barked wildly, tail wagging despite his exhaustion. The rescuers sprang into action, digging furiously. Their hands worked faster than their tools, desperation fueling their movements. Dust clouded the air, stinging their eyes, but they didn't stop. Max clawed at the dirt beside them, ignoring his bleeding paws. His entire body trembled from exhaustion, but nothing could keep him away. "Hold on, kid," a rescuer called, voice hoarse. "We're coming for you." Another aftershock trembled through the ground, sending loose rocks tumbling. For a moment, the rescuers feared the worst. Then, "We see him." A rescuer reached into the narrow gap, brushing against something small, something warm. "The boy, I have him!" Max let out a sharp, excited bark, pushing his nose into the opening. Carefully, gently, the rescuer pulled the boy free from the crushing weight of the rubble. His body was weak, his skin covered in dust, but he was breathing. Then, just as they pulled him out, another aftershock rocked the ground. "Move!" The team barely had time to react as a section of the collapsed building gave way, sending more debris crashing down behind them. They had made it. Just in time. The moment the boy was laid on the stretcher, Max leaped forward. He sniffed his friend's face, licking away the dirt, nudging his tiny hands with his nose. A small whimper left Max's throat, as if begging the boy to wake up. The rescuers watched in silence, hearts pounding, waiting. And then, a twitch. The boy's fingers curled weakly. Max let out a joyful bark, his tail wagging uncontrollably. Slowly, the boy's eyes fluttered open. He was weak, barely able to focus, but his lips moved, forming a single word, "Max." A collective gasp filled the air. Some rescuers wiped their eyes. Others let out shaky laughs of relief. The boy was alive, and he knew Max had saved him. Max pressed his nose into the boy's palm, his body relaxing for the first time in hours. His job was done. Moments later, the boy's parents arrived. The mother collapsed at her son's side, sobbing, clutching his dust-covered body as if afraid to let go. The father, usually a strong man, wiped at his eyes, his hands shaking. "Thank you," he choked out, looking at Max. "Thank you, boy." Max tilted his head, ears perking up at the soft voice. Then, as if he understood, he licked the father's outstretched hand. The bystanders erupted into cheers. The story of Max, the dog who never gave up, spread like wildfire through the crowd. As paramedics tended to the boy, Max curled up beside him, refusing to leave. The rescuers watched in awe. They had seen dogs do incredible things, but this was something else. This was pure, unbreakable loyalty. And as the sun began to rise over the ruins of the city, one thing became clear. Max had proven once again that a dog's love knows no bounds. The ambulance doors slammed shut as paramedics rushed the boy toward the hospital. Inside, his frail body lay on the stretcher, an oxygen mask covering his dust-streaked face. His heartbeat was weak but steady. Max, covered in grime and limping from exhaustion, tried to jump into the ambulance after him. His paws left smudges of dirt against the metal step, his body shaking as he barked, demanding to stay. A paramedic knelt beside him, gently placing a hand on his head. "Easy, boy, he's safe now." But Max wouldn't budge. His eyes darted between the paramedic and the boy inside, as if begging them to let him go with his best friend. The boy's mother, still trembling from the fear of nearly losing her son, wiped her tears and turned to the paramedics. "Please, let Max come. He won't rest until he knows my son is okay." They exchanged glances before nodding. "All right, buddy," one of them said, lifting Max into the ambulance. "You've earned it." As the doors closed, the sirens wailed, carrying them away into the night. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and clean linen. Machines beeped softly in the background. The boy lay motionless in his bed, bandages wrapped around his arms and forehead. At his bedside, Max rested with his head on the mattress, his tail lying still. He hadn't left the boy's side since they arrived. Nurses and doctors passed by, whispering in amazement about the dog who refused to leave his friend alone. "He won't eat," one nurse murmured. "He barely moves," another added. It wasn't until the boy's fingers twitched, just the slightest movement, that Max's ears perked up. His tail gave a weak wag, hope flickering back into his tired eyes. News of Max's bravery spread like wildfire. Reporters stood outside the hospital, eager to share the story of the loyal dog who never gave up. "The Earthquake Hero," headlines. Read. Footage of Max digging through the rubble, refusing to stop, played on television screens across the country. Messages flooded in from people who were touched by the story, praising Max's determination and love. Strangers gathered outside the hospital, holding signs that read, "Thank you, Max." But inside, none of that mattered to Max. He didn't care about the cameras, the attention, or the praise. All he cared about was the boy, lying in that hospital bed, still too weak to open his eyes. Then, finally, it happened. The boy's eyelids fluttered open. He blinked, dazed, his breathing slow and steady. His mother gasped, rushing to his side. "Sweetheart." "Oh, my baby, you're awake." His gaze, unfocused at first, slowly sharpened. He looked around the room, confused, until his eyes landed on the familiar golden fur beside him. "Max?" His voice was weak, barely above a whisper. At the sound of his name, Max sprang up, his tail wagging wildly. He let out a soft whimper, pressing his nose against the boy's hand. Tears filled the boy's eyes as he reached out, fingers curling into Max's fur. He pulled himself forward as much as he could and wrapped his arms around his best friend. "You saved me," he whispered. Max licked his cheek, a quiet confirmation that he would always be there. Days later, the boy and Max were strong enough to leave the hospital. They stepped outside to find the town waiting for them. A massive crowd had gathered, cheering as they walked out. Banners hung from buildings reading, "Max, our hero." Children held up posters with drawings of the brave dog. The mayor stood on a small stage, microphone in hand. "Today we honor a true hero, a dog who never gave up, a dog who reminded us all what loyalty and love truly mean." A volunteer stepped forward holding a small velvet box. Inside was a shining medal engraved with the words, "Max, bravery, beyond measure." The mayor knelt and carefully placed the medal around Max's neck. The crowd erupted into applause. Max, though confused by all the attention, wagged his tail happily as the boy ruffled his fur. Though the earthquake had left destruction in its wake, life slowly began to rebuild. Families worked together to restore their homes, neighbors helping one another in ways they never had before. But for one boy and his dog, nothing would ever be the same. Everywhere they went, people stopped to pet Max, thanking him for his courage. Despite all the attention, Max remained the same, loyal, protective, and always by the boy's side. The boy's parents watched as their son played outside, Max never straying far from him. His mother sighed, her heart full. "I always knew Max loved him, but I never realized just how deep their bond was." His father nodded. "That dog did what no human could. He found our son when we had almost lost hope." At the local fire station, the rescue team held a small meeting. One of the men stood up and cleared his throat. "Sometimes instincts are stronger than logic," he admitted. "Max knew. He knew before we did. And next time we doubt a search dog, we remember Max." As the sun set over the town, the boy sat under the large oak tree in his backyard. Max curled beside him. The boy scratched behind Max's ears, smiling. "You know you're famous now." Max let out a small huff, as if unimpressed. The boy chuckled. "But to me, you'll always just be my best friend." Max lifted his head, pressing his nose against the boy's cheek. No words were needed, because in that moment, in that quiet space between a boy and his dog, one truth remained. Their bond was unshakable, their friendship unbreakable, and, no matter what happened in the future, Max had already proven one thing. Loyalty, real loyalty, never fades.